Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, Ladan.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast. Today's guest is Roberta Goode, and she's really interesting because she founded Goode Compliance International, GCI, and this was a consulting firm that basically got medical device companies back into the good graces of, the government or best practices for manufacturing and all this kind of stuff, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. And so I'm really excited to have her on the show because we haven't had somebody that's founded a consulting company before. We've had people that have founded product companies, and it's just really interesting to hear a different perspective. Also, what she was looking for when she was hiring consultants. She had a really interesting way of hiring people, basically going through the university system and finding the best students through her classes and doing it like this. So I really enjoyed this, and hopefully you will as well. Roberta Goode, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. You actually spoke at University of Florida, and it was like an entrepreneurial talk. And one of my colleagues, knows that I'm interested in entrepreneurial stuff and starting your own business. So like, okay, you have to go to this. But I have to say, it was very different than I expected, and it was kind of shocking, because you were like, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. You basically need to work 20 years in industry before you can start a company. And I was a little bit shocked. So after the talk, I came up to you, I'm like, is that really true? Do I really have to be like 50 years old or 60 years old by the time I start my own company? But you had more of a focus on the service side of things or the consulting side of things. So do you want to talk a little bit about what you do and how you've gotten there as well?
Sure. And, I have to put this caveat out there. Last night I was doing some lecturing at a different university, and a student came up afterwards and asked me the same question. He's like, well, I have an idea right now for product, and do I need to really wait until I have all this experience? And I told him, no, disruption, inspiration, innovation, it has to be, it has its own life force, right? When you have an idea that can change the industry or the world, it needs to get born now, and there's no reason to wait. I mean, what if Steve Jobs had waited instead of dropping out of school and starting what he really believed in, right? I mean, so a product, if you have an idea for a product, I think sometimes those just have to get launched, and to heck with the process. But to the extent that a service or consulting business it might be, of interest to any of your listeners, I think that is a different story. Obviously, you can't provide expertise in consulting until you become an expert, and you have to earn that right, that privilege, because you're asking companies to trust you as an individual with really what comes down to the lives and the quality of life of their patients. And that's not something that should be entered into lightly. And there is a process, I believe, for doing that in a responsible way. And the good news is it also leads to success in business, or at least it did for me. So would you like me to talk a little bit about that process then, at least how I see it?
Yeah, and I'm realizing too, I don't know if we've necessarily explained what you do, helping companies get through the regulatory side of things in biomedical engineering. And so maybe talk a little bit about your background, what it is you do, and that process as well.
Well, I guess I'm now in my second entrepreneurial venture. So what I do now is different than what I talked about at UF. So let me give a little bit of both. So my first entrepreneurial venture was called GCI, Goode Compliance International. And that's the one that really took off and gave me the platform for now trying something new. What I did at GCI is we basically helped companies get back into FDA's good graces. So medical device manufacturers, they put a product on the market, something goes awry, as ultimately tends to happen. If you sell in a product and it's of sufficient technological complexity, depending on the intended use, the population of patients and any comorbidities they have and how complex their health situation may be, you're going to get a collision of variables here that ultimately leads to, say, an unexpected outcome, maybe a negative outcome. Getting these products better, making them better, refining the technology, perhaps refining the instructions for use, many times modifying the design and the implications thereof, like regulatory implications, implications in intellectual property. These are complex undertakings. And so at GCI, we had a team of, I guess, it was up to 65 engineers on staff. Typically, we maintained a staff of 50 engineers, and we would provide that expertise and the manpower, the hands and feet to go in and basically not make the products, but make the products better, safer, help them to meet their product specifications and market specifications with statistical certainty, with really bringing the scientific method with confidence values, confidence levels, and performance indicators, LTPD, and so on, to assure, with the scientific veracity that these products actually can be trusted to do what they were designed to do.
So would I be right in saying that you're a little bit of like, I don't know, regulatory or medical device fireman, putting out fires everywhere, or what?
Yeah. Yes, you could say that. Maybe a little bit less on the regulatory side and a bit more on the actual engineering, actually getting in there. We would actually put our folks into those factories, for those global medical device companies. We'd actually just launch a team, our A team. And we had teams that would do oncology work, teams that would do hip implants that understood shot peening and diffusion bonding and all of those specific requirements. We had folks that worked in contact lenses. We had folks that worked in gastroenterology, men's and women's pelvic health, and, any cardiology. We did some neuro work as well, which may interest you, neuroradiology, interventional neuroradiology, like deployment of coils into aneurysms in the brain and so on. And so we would send our A team for that particular product specialty into those factories, and we'd put out those fires and work side by side with the folks that were the full-time employees of those companies to help them see what is considered state of the art by the FDA and by the global medical device regulatory bodies, for scientific validation to designs to manufacturing processes, apply statistical rigor to that so that we knew what the repeatability, reliability was, and teach them. Really, we were transferring that knowledge to their employees so that when we left, it wasn't just putting in a cameo appearance that's not sustainable. When we left, they had the knowledge. I mean, frankly, they always had it. They were the experts in their products and processes, not us. We just knew how to make it sort of legit, make it hardcore scientifically. And we had the manpower and we had the experience of doing that in efficient and effective ways.
That's really interesting. Yeah. I mean, you having seen so many cases, you were able to see what works and what didn't, and maybe best practices and maybe what works in terms of engineering, and not necessarily the specifics, but then their engineering team could come in with the specifics. So what does a job like this look like? I mean, I've heard about consulting, in like businesses and everything like this, and that you have that A team, you have 3 or 5 people come in for like 2 weeks and they work like 140-hour weeks, and at the end give a report and say, okay, this is what you need to do and this is what you need to follow. Is it similar in this area as well?
Not really. It can be. Many of my compatriots who have hung their shingle out as consultants, that's what they do. But that wasn't my business model. I think my business model was so successful and meaningful. And when I say successful, I don't mean just financially, fiscally, although it was that too. I mean, we really made a difference, I believe, for our clients and their patients. And it was so rewarding. It felt altruistic, really, largely to me. And the reason it was so is because we weren't just putting down a set of requirements, working 140 hours in those, weeks and then leaving. We were actually deploying a team. Sometimes we would deploy, one time for a project, we deployed a team of maybe 45 or 50 engineers to a factory, and we just basically moved in. And we didn't just look at the situation and come up with a diagnosis and a get well plan. We actually got them well. We were coming up with a plan for that collaboration, that really rewarding collaboration between them and us. And then we worked side by side with them to implement the plan, which gave us the ability to calibrate along the way, to have checkpoints, milestones, two-way communication. And we guaranteed the work to the extent that I would actually offer to be present during their follow-up regulatory inspections. These are folks that are in trouble. They've got some non-compliance issues, and I would be present, front room, back room, what have you, just on site as needed to back up the work that we did. And I remember once for a global, really large company, they were at risk of losing their CE mark in the European Union, which represented a sizable portion of their, income, their revenue. And I was actually brought into the front room to talk to the notified body that was responsible for, applying the CE mark to their product and defending the work that we did and explained it from a technical perspective. This fellow happened to also have an engineering background, which was fortunate because we were speaking the same language. And at the end of the day, the concerns were lifted and the company was able to put their products back on the market throughout the European Union and to aid all of the patients that relied on their excellent products. So that was really rewarding and really unique as a business model, I think.
And how long were you there for that, that 45-person team, or, even generally like average, how long would you be moved into their factory?
Yeah. Well, of course it varied depending on the complexity of what we needed to correct, right? And the complexity of the product. But generally, I would say we would be deployed for anywhere from 9 to 18 months. It takes many times what you find when you go into a manufacturing company is that what the FDA or the European Union has, the notified bodies have cited as their non-compliance issues, perhaps there was a patient injury or some other non-compliance detected for the products. Generally, you find that when you start peeling the onion, that there are core issues. For example, many times, you'd find that not only was a product, it had not maybe gone through the statistical rigor for design verification to show that the product can consistently meet its product specification, right, with a statistical level of rigor. But then you peel that back and you find, the test methods that are being used, in the lab or on the production line or in the design and development lab were not validated. So, this equipment, these tests are being used to show that indeed the product meets its spec, but the test methods themselves perhaps weren't validated with a certain level of accuracy and precision. So really, the output from the test result isn't meaningful. It can't be trusted whether it was in the positive or in the negative. Maybe things that failed the test actually were compliant and vice versa. So we found oftentimes we'd have to peel that back to the core and then say to the company, look, unless we take these additional underlying foundational steps, we're not really leaving you with a sustainable product. Now, the challenge there is the elephant in the room is that, of course, a consultant's going to want to make more money, is going to want to make it a longer, more complex, more expensive process, right? And how to earn the trust of those decision makers in those companies and say to them, look, obviously we do better when we stay longer, but that is not what this is about. This is about giving you a sustainable solution that's actually defensible and that will work in the long term. And I think that was the hardest and maybe the most satisfying part of my job was earning the trust of those decision makers and proving ourselves, being prepared to show precedent where those issues had been recognized by regulatory bodies, and just really having the kind of diligence and the kind of integrity, that my employees had every day that showed that we weren't just in there to make a fast dollar and get out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, that is kind of a conflict of interest of, even let's say a firefighter, if they were paid by hour or something like this, is not to put out the fire and just kind of keep it going. But yeah, I'm kind of curious, how did you get into this? And I guess what were you looking for your employees as well when you were hiring them?
Okay, well, two kind of different questions. Maybe I'll start from the end, the second question. What I was looking for in my employees, gosh, there's a funny saying that hiring these employees is kind of like pornography. It's hard to define it, but you know it when you see it. So, with that in mind, I had been an adjunct faculty member at a university, and I still am, in fact, at the University of Miami's College of Engineering in the biomedical engineering department, where I had the opportunity for 16-week semesters to have a group of students, a large group, usually around 40 or 50 students each semester. And for the last 20 years, I've had this privilege to instruct them. Well, the advantage for me, one day I realized this. Wait a minute. I get to know these bright young minds really well. They need jobs when they graduate. I need employees. This could be an opportunity that's a win-win. So I began hiring each semester. I would hire the top 3 or 4 or 5, so the top 10% of the performers in my class. After a 16-week interview, just like on The Apprentice, it's a really long time to get to know not just the aptitude of these students who really got the material, but more importantly, the attitude. Did they have that special something, that secret formula that made them great employees and great engineers? And as hard as I've tried to figure out what that is, I can give you a couple of characteristics, but it doesn't really quite define the whole is more than the sum of its parts, right? So some of the qualities are attention to detail. Another one that's really key, besides just raw intelligence, because people who are intelligent, you can teach them anything, right? And there's a curiosity and a thirst to learn there. But there's something more. It's way more important to get someone who really wants to learn and wants to succeed and is excited about the opportunity to do what we do in our company. I can teach them the skills. They're not going to come to me with that right out of college. But you have to have somebody that actually gives a crap, You can't teach that. That's just a personality trait. If they care, if they're psyched, if they're in it, then I can work with that.
Yeah, definitely. It gives you that energy, or that gives them that drive to, stick with it when the time gets tough. Yeah. So basically you were just looking for enthusiastic, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed people then, right?
Absolutely. People who were psyched, who were curious, who were enthusiastic, who had a passion for what we do. These were people that knew me after 16 weeks and I knew them. And I think there was a mutual understanding about the level of energy and commitment and passion that I was looking for. And we recognize that in each other. Those of us who are excited and passionate about what we do, I think we see that in each other, almost like a radar that goes off, It's hard to describe it, but we recognize it in each other when we find it.
Yeah, definitely. And so were you looking for people that had lots of experience? I mean, because you were talking about your story, and I really want to get into that. Like, okay, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. But basically for your employees, you weren't looking for that same thing, right? You were just looking for somebody who's quick on their feet and be able to, wow, that was a good demonstration of not being quick on the feet. But so basically it was just somebody that you could train quickly then, right? That's what you were looking for.
Yes. So what was unique, again, about this business model? So we had to have this expertise. I had to have the expertise, and I had to have people in the organization with the expertise who had earned it over many years of actually working in the industry, in design, manufacturing, quality assurance, regulatory affairs in the device industry. But we set those folks up as mentors, and we had to have those people, those employees were very special. They had all the enthusiasm and passion and work ethic that the younger folks had, but they also had the experience. And I was really quite fortunate to have people who had that, including Ankita Kulhari and Jeremy Cortez. And I mean, there were so many really great manager level experts that made this work. And then everyone else, we'd fill in the ranks with new graduates from different universities, biomedical engineering graduates, sometimes electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, but usually BMEs. And we'd bring them in, and we had an open sort of bullpen set up, like at the New York Stock Exchange, where it worked because everybody communicated constantly. Their mentor managers sat right with them, alongside them, as did I. And we shared learning as it came down live, real time. And we collaborated, and they would throw a question out. Hey, I need to document so-and-so. How do I do that? What does FDA require? Oh, just do this. And everyone would hear it. So learning, we were just immersed in the free exchange of ideas live that could be applied, and that would sort of by osmosis seep into everyone who happened to be in the room at the same time.
Wow, that's really cool. Yeah, I mean, and that's honestly a more natural way to learn than sticking your nose in a textbook. That's completely unnatural. I'm surprised that actually anybody is able to learn like that. So, okay, let's get into your story. I want to hear about your kind of path and the winding path, and then you did this, and you did this, and it was pretty amazing.
Oh, thank you. Well, one of the things that I have struggled with most of my professional life, and I bet you a lot of your audience members have too, is that work-life balance. I mean, that is, I'm still trying to get that right, to be honest. It's really challenging. When I finished graduate school, I knew that biomedical engineering it was my nirvana. I had found my thing. I thought I wanted to be a physician, but I was really good at technical problem solving. And for a number of reasons, I've found this biomedical engineering was kind of the best of both worlds for me. And I threw myself into it. So I was working crazy, crazy long hours in product development. You have a market release date, market launch date for a new product, say it's a year away, right? At a big conference of surgeons. It doesn't matter what technical roadblocks you run into along the way, you have to make it by then. It has to be available by then because that is when you're going to have your launch, right? And the pomp and circumstance that goes along with it. So, I mean, I remember working 80-hour weeks for a long, long time. No life balance at all. So at some point in my career, I realized this is not how I wanted to go for the next, 50 years. I wanted to have children. I married to a wonderful guy. And I didn't want my life to be written by someone else. I wanted to write my story. So I sat down and I made a plan. And this plan worked really well for me. And over the last 20 years, I've given it as an example to many of my students who've gone on to make it a success. So it's probably not the path that everyone takes or should take, and it's not the only right path, right? But this worked for me. So by way of example, I'll just share with you what I did. So the first thing I did was I realized if I'm going to have the ability to write my own story, it probably means I need to have my own organization, either product or service. I decided on service because for me, I just wasn't comfortable with the degree of exposure or risk that I felt would be inherent with a product liability if I were to launch a product. But I had some creative ideas. So I dipped my toe in the water, submitted a few patent applications. They were approved, got a chance to try out product development. But ultimately, I found that the ability to communicate best practices and the sort of that personal touch, that one-on-one interaction with people is what got me jacked, not putting a product on the market. So for me, it was obvious the service industry was where I needed to focus. So I guess the first step really was figuring out what motivated me. And that's a really hard thing to do, but I would encourage anyone listening to this podcast to really take the time, invest the time in figuring out what motivates you. Where do you feel flow? Where do you not notice the passage of time? What are you working on where you don't feel like you're working? And for me, that was interacting with other people in a technical manner. So whatever that is, do that. So I realized that in order to do this type of service consulting, I'd need to be an expert. And so I set out a plan to get a job in product development or design, which I already had at that time, but to try to, meet some goals there with the patents and understanding the whole commercialization process. Then to get a job in manufacturing engineering, then to get a job in quality assurance engineering. And finally, I thought I would need a job in regulatory affairs, that these combined roles I felt would give me the platform, along with some business training classes, which I took up at MIT Sloan in their executive education certificate program, to run a business and to really understand what my client companies, medical device manufacturers, have to deal with, have to consider as they make decisions in one area. They're, of course, affected by what's going on in all aspects of the business. So I felt like that would be a solid foundation to get started. And so I with great intention, very methodically undertook those steps. I, completed my goals, milestones in design, applied for a job at a different company in manufacturing, got it, did that, learned process validation and several, common manufacturing processes. For me, it was liquid silicone rubber injection molding. That was kind of my thing. Then I got a job in quality assurance, which was a totally different set of skills and opened up my eyes to how design and manufacturing really influence quality and post-market surveillance and customer complaints and all of that. And then I got a job doing regulatory affairs. I actually submitted a few 510Ks for medical devices for that company and learned what FDA and notified bodies expect. Sat in on some audits, and at that point I felt that I was ready. I took a few business classes, set out, I had an ideation of my business model. Did I want partners? What kind of insurance would I need? Where was I going to get my employees? What were my mission, vision, and values? All the way down to my elevator pitch, which reminds me, I also hired someone to mentor me in sales because that was my job was sales. And so I needed to understand how to sell my product. Then, of course, you have to look at financing. How are you going to fund your venture? For me, I did something a little bit atypical. Since we had a home at that time, I actually applied for a home equity line of credit for my local bank, which is neat because it's not a loan. It's a line of credit like a credit card with a limit on it based on the equity in your home. And it was there just in case I needed to make payroll and was late with my receivables or something. That served me very well. Hired people that I trusted and that I knew from my university connections, built a great network, started moonlighting before I quit my full-time job, made sure I had at least 6 months of cushion in the bank for, living expenses, and, crossed my fingers and took the plunge.
Wow. That's incredible. Okay, so from setting the intention to figuring out what you want to do to actually like taking the plunge, how much time had elapsed?
10 or 11 years.
Wow. That's some patience right there. That's very incredible.
Well, to be honest, it probably took me the first couple of years. I was probably, still trying to put it all together and figure out what I wanted. So maybe by the time I got down to brass tacks, I was already in research and development when I had this idea. So I guess I'd already done a couple of years' time there. So, but for the remainder, I knew that I didn't want to hurt my reputation. I think your reputation and the network are the most valuable assets anyone has who's an entrepreneur or who wants to be one. And so I couldn't just go to a company, show up at a company, learn all I could, and not give them something back for a few years. Right? It just didn't seem ethical to me. So that's when I spoke to your group, I talked about learn and return, then start and impart. Learn and return. If you're going to work at some of the world-class companies and benefit from seeing their best practices in action, which, they've honed over many years and many millions or billions of dollars, you've got to return something to them. Do your best work for them for a couple of years. Make a difference. Leave a lasting impact. Fix something that was broken. Make something more efficient or reliable than it was when you got there. And that doesn't happen overnight. And only then really did I feel like I'd earned the right to start something. And then once you start, you have to impart, share that knowledge, pay it forward to the next generation. And that's kind of what brought me to my second venture where I am now.
Yeah, do you want to talk about that?
Just briefly, maybe. So I said what gave me that sense of flow, of timelessness, was interaction with people and sharing technical knowledge. And truly that, no matter what happened over the years that I had my business, that remained my single favorite activity. That was the thing that got me psyched to get out of bed every morning. And for years and years, I was never once dreading my job. I always was psyched to go. And it was because of that interaction, that energy that comes from that. And it just feels so meaningful to me to share what I learned. Otherwise, it's kind of empty. You learn stuff. It's great. It's exciting if you're curious. But then it's kind of lonely to have information or knowledge and not be able to share it, right? It just didn't feel complete. So when I had the opportunity to do so because of the success of my first company, I started really what is I hope is my second career in life. It's Altrec LLC. And this is work from my heart. This is just sharing knowledge. Basically, I provide custom training to medical device manufacturers worldwide. I just finished a stint over in England where actually I just teach them the best practices or some of these standards, like risk management. That's such a complicated thing and everyone struggles with it. It's really not that complicated. But I think maybe if I have any talent, it's to be able to take the complex and break it down to its simplest elements and kind of guide my clients, through that process. And so that training really gives me the opportunity to just do what I love to do the most. And so far, it seems that they appreciate it too.
Interesting. So are you doing kind of like lectures or something like this? Or are you actually doing like a longer, like intensive, almost like when you took over the factory? Do you take over another factory and teach them, teach them all this? Or how does it look like actually?
Yeah, well, it's custom in-house training. So device manufacturer will hire me to come in and generally do a seminar. And how long that seminar is depends on the topic and what they want to get out of it. But for example, the one that I just finished in England for a global medical device manufacturer, they brought a large team, a diverse team of engineers and customer complaint specialists, quality folks, design folks, manufacturing folks from their factories from all over the world to England and put them in a room with me for 3 days. So it was 24 hours, very intensive workshop where I'm teaching them the material, the information that, the regulatory bodies, how to comply, right? But I'm teaching them with examples. In that case, there were 7 workshops over 3 days that were specific to their product and process. So as an engineer, I'm able to work with them to learn their product and process well enough to make workshops that are interactive and specific to the challenges they currently have and teach the material in a way that's real and pragmatic based on their processes. So that's, I think, where the value is that it's custom.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That sounds really fun. Like a lot less, yeah, a lot less engineering work and a lot less, I don't know, technical side of things and working more on the soft skills. And well, I don't know. I guess it would have the benefits. So actually, how long have you been doing this?
So I started this in January of this year.
Oh, wow.
So what is this, October? So 10 months. And it's been wonderful. It's been really successful, although my business model is entirely different. This isn't something that I deploy a team for. This is just me. I take the opportunities that I think I can have the most impact. And I've been, quite busy, but still had that quality of life that I was looking for when I launched GCI many years ago. And by the way, the happy ending is, I did get to have it all. I just couldn't have it all at the same time. But the flexibility, running my own business, I probably worked way more hours than if I had stayed in the corporate world, but I was flexible about those hours. I took my kids to school and I taught art when they were in elementary school to them and to their classrooms. And, just the privilege of being present and showing up for my life on my own terms, to be there for my kids and with my husband and for my friends and my family. And like my mom sadly got very, very ill not long ago. And because of the flexibility that I was so fortunate to have with my business, I was able to be present for her. And, one of my greatest regrets would have been had I missed being there. These are the things I think that people think about at the end of their careers as they do their lives in review. And I guess I was fortunate to review my life before it was at that point. I kind of did the life in review in advance and said, what do I not want to regret? And then kind of made those changes up front to the extent that I could.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like you're incredibly intentional about this and something I'm aligned about as well. Like I want to also have flexibility and work when I want to work or work because I want to work, not because somebody above me is cracking a whip. I'm curious, what happened to Goode Compliance International? Is that still going on or did you close that down? You said 50 people were involved. So yeah, what's happened with that?
Wow, good question. Yeah. So what I did with GCI is, maybe it will surprise you what I did. I had the luxury of not having to sell that business in order to start the next one or retire, if you will, because I'd been pretty intentional about finances as well. I mentioned my mom and her illness. Her illness took a significant turn for the worse. at the end of 2017. And so I knew that there was a timing element as well. I wanted to be present with her and for her, as well as some new opportunities I was looking at down the road with Altrec. And so it seemed like the right time. What I did was I fulfilled every contract that we had in place to wind the business up by December of 2017. So fulfilled all those contracts, made sure every single employee had a job. In many cases, those went hand in hand where I'd actually gave my wonderful, my loyal employees the opportunity and the coaching to start their own consulting firms, handed them the contracts with these global manufacturers that I had earned over many years. And then they fulfilled those contracts. So they were basically given a company, the opportunity to start their own company and have, a large contract right at the outset that I had sold and closed ahead of time, right? And in this way, our clients were pleased because they weren't left hanging. And I didn't want to do that. I mean, I'd worked too hard to develop this wonderful network of clients and this trust and this reputation. And so when word got out that I was looking to wind down the company, of course, the vultures start to circle, right? There were a few interested parties who were interested in buying GCI, and it would have been cool to sell it for sure, but there was a downside. The upside would be financial, right? And the continuation of our good work. The downside was something that meant a lot more to me, and it was one of the hardest decisions of my whole life. They wanted to use my name, even though I wouldn't be present. I needed to get to my family and take care of my mother. I had other things that needed my attention that were, you can't put a price on. And they wanted to use my name. My reputation's not for sale, not even for millions of dollars. And if I'm not present, I don't know any of these investors well enough to say, yeah, you can use my name and my reputation to make to build your fortune. But what if they didn't deliver? What if they didn't care as much as I cared? I mean, I would do anything humanly possible to make things right for my clients if something went awry, and they knew that. I didn't know if these guys would do the same thing. I wasn't willing to let them potentially tarnish my reputation or to harm my clients. So I wrapped it up. I did a couple of smart things where I got some passive income agreements with people that I trusted who had worked for my company for a long time, where I could funnel business to them. I trusted them and I knew that they could do projects well here and there. And so as I continued to get opportunities, I would say, oh, I'm not doing that any longer, but here's a person I trust. And in some cases, I benefit through contractual arrangements with those individuals for doing so. Not all the time. It just sort of depends.
Interesting. So I'm curious, those investors that would have used your name, I mean, GCI is Goode Compliance International. So Goode is, of course, is your last name. Do you mean it in this way that they would use your name, or in a way that like, oh yeah, she's totally still working with us and, pretend to email in your name or something like this? Or which of those is that?
Well, in all cases, there were three, I guess, more serious opportunities, right? And in all three cases, they wanted to use the name Goode Compliance International, Roberta Goode. They also wanted me to stick around for a few years so that it would be true that I was still there, at least for a while, right? And yet I knew that I was ready to do some other things. And as I said, there was a sense of urgency about the timing. Look, it would have been great had my mom been healthy, and this was a terminal condition she had. So, the rubber meets the road there. Had she been healthy, sure, I would have spent a couple of years, made sure the transition went well, maybe provided my name if the purchasers had earned my trust over that time. But I didn't have that kind of time. I needed to, cancer doesn't wait, right? For people to finish up their hobbies, their trips, their work, their projects, their books. I couldn't spend the extra time. And so if I didn't stick around, they wanted to use my name anyway. And for the reasons that I discussed, I just wasn't willing to give them my name and my reputation, even if they wouldn't have done anything, illicit. I'm sure they wouldn't have said, oh, she's still here if I wasn't there. they wanted me to be. But if I couldn't be, they were willing to leverage my network and use the name Roberta Goode in whatever capacity they could. But again, I didn't know that they do the kind of work that I had done. I had earned that reputation over blood, sweat, and tears over many years. And it's so valuable to me. It's perhaps the most valuable thing I have is my good name. So I wound it up instead, made sure I took care of everybody, and I shut it down.
Yeah, that's understandable. I mean, that's literally selling out. If you were to sell your name for, a few $1,000,000 or whatever. Yeah, that's very interesting. And you had mentioned, something about like liabilities in like products or like product companies. Are there any other differences between consulting companies and product companies?
Yes, there are many, many differences. It's a totally different business model. The way that, many of my former students who've now gone on to start their own companies, and I'm really proud of them, shout out to them, by the way, if they hear this, have done it. Seems to make sense. You have this great idea. There's been a lot of traction lately from new graduates in the mobile medical device market. We've all heard that Apple Watch was approved by FDA recently as the first mobile medical device, right? For a cardiology application. So, writing mobile apps and, all kinds of new ideas. This has been just so interesting and exciting. There's such a sea change in what we call medical devices recently. So, somebody has an idea, maybe they find investors. There are many different forms of investors. You can have an angel investor, which is generally just an affluent individual who provides capital for a startup, and maybe in exchange for equity or some other arrangement. Or perhaps they can hook up with a venture capitalist, which is, that's an investor, a little different, who provides capital to start up ventures, through the equities markets. So financing generally comes in those forms, maybe in a creative way, such as that home equity line of credit, friends or family, maybe a physician champion of the product, or even an SBIR grant. And then launch the product. Of course, the intellectual property and the regulatory approvals are going to be the biggest hurdles in that case. So the patent application generally starts with a provisional patent application, which provides some protections under certain circumstances for a period of time, a limited period of time, to allow maybe the entrepreneur to get their feet on the ground, find some additional investors, do some feasibility and concept prototyping work. Then it's generally, a lot of times there's a partner or a couple of partners involved, just to sort of spread the risk, not just financially, but for some of the tough decision making, because it's complex to do this. I mean, you've heard the statistics. I mean, something like 600,000 new companies are launched every year, 95% of which fail in just the first year alone. And I think something like 1% make it to 5 years. So this is a complex venture. At that point, the question is, what do you need to get a product into the market? You may not need a huge workforce of employees like I had, because our employees were our product, right? We were delivering the services. But you'd certainly need some kind of relationships with someone who can manufacture the product for you or with you, or provide raw materials. You've got suppliers, and the complexities of supply chain cannot be understated. They can be daunting. Just getting all the materials you need for the price you need at the quality you need and in a reliable, consistent fashion, turning that into a product, making sure the margins, which are perhaps the single most important thing, I believe, for success in a company. The margins matter more than the revenue. So it's really revenue minus the cost of goods sold, the cost that it takes you to make that revenue. That gives you your gross profit. When you divide your gross profit into your revenue, you get a percentage, times 100, you get a percentage. That's your margin. Margins, are basically how you know that you're healthy. There are different margins for different business models. In consulting, the margins were excellent on average, which allowed me to be flexible at times, and other times less, more profit centric. That flexibility and the ability to respond to each client's individual need and circumstance, as well as my business needs and circumstances, it's such a dynamic process. And I think that was in large part responsible for our success and the success of our customers. That same thing is true if you start a product-based organization. I think other things that should be considered when starting a company are, have a 5-year plan that's a rolling plan. And then once a year, at least once a year, meet to roll it into the next year, see what worked and what didn't work. The post-mortem, I think that's a great business tool. What are we going to change? Because not everything you try works. The concept of adapt or die, there's so many changes even in the service industry. There were things that changed with H-1B visas, with worker classification rules through the Department of Labor, with procurement practices. It's adapt or die. And then having an exit plan. You should have an exit plan before you even close to exiting, because that's not something you want to do in the heat of the moment. I had an exit plan, and I had to change it at the end because of an uncontrollable circumstance that I described. But at least the general form for what was important to me, taking care of my employees, fulfilling the contracts, that was set in place. So it wasn't too difficult to just accelerate what I had already kind of planned to do eventually.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. I mean, definitely, like, if you ever want to like sell the company or, close it down or something like this, then you really need a big plan. And it's difficult to go back 10 years into the past and try to clean up the books and make sense of what was going on and try to convince a potential buyer that everything's been okay. But Roberta, this has been really, really interesting. This and then your talk, which unfortunately I wasn't recording. But do you have any final thoughts or anything that you want to add before we finish up?
I guess I would just leave you and your audience with just one thought, something I learned along the way, if I could boil it down to this one thought. And that is, don't confuse action for traction. Just because you're busy doesn't mean you're making progress. And, in my experience, I spent a lot of time being busy. I've been busy for the last 20 years. When I say busy, I mean like sleepless, busy constantly. And that doesn't mean you're making progress. You can all run around and documents are getting signed and people are going to sales training and, contracts are coming in and you're hiring people and you're letting people go and you're refining your margins. But if you're not making progress, if you don't really know what matters the most to you, is it your income? Is it your reputation, your legacy? Is it altruism? Is it having financial security? Is it having flexibility, work-life balance? If you don't know what you're working towards, then all of that action isn't necessarily getting you any traction or any closer to your goal.
Yeah, that's really well said. I mean, it's kind of like do what you love, like what you were talking about earlier. Really be intentional, maybe like you, and really think about it. And don't just, run around in the hamster wheel just to run around, but maybe even take some time off or a moment or, something like this to really sit down and what you want. That's something that I think that both of us are kind of similar in this case because, I did this as well. And I could have run down a path and I wouldn't have been happy, but, I took some time to think about it, maybe too much time, but found what I really like and I've been enjoying it. Yeah, I would highly recommend this to the audience as well. That's really good advice. And it might cost you a little bit of time and effort right now, but it's going to be much, much better in the long run.
Absolutely. So just begin with the end in mind, right?
Exactly. Roberta, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this. I've really enjoyed having somebody who's run a consulting company on the show. I have had somebody that was doing consulting, but this was a really nice, I guess, expose of how it works and how to get into it. And I guess your story of what you were doing with GCI.
Well, Ladan, it's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I've enjoyed talking to you so much today.
Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that. I really liked it. Like I said, I thought it was a really unique skill set and unique point of view that we haven't heard about on the show yet. And also, she's been really, really helpful, like almost too helpful. It's really nice. She's been like, okay, here's my Rolodex, here's my LinkedIn, like this is who you can talk to. And I mean, I guess this is what you need to do if you are working in a, I guess, relationship-based company where basically your name and who you know is directly influences what kind of jobs you're going to get, what kind of contracts you're going to get. So I found this to be very, very interesting. Maybe some of you are thinking about going into consulting or going more on the services path more than the products path. And so this may have been useful for you. Again, when I first heard her talk, I was really scared. I'm just like, oh man, am I going to have to wait 20 years to be able to start something? But it's really just in the services field, I guess. So yeah, who knows? Maybe each one of us listeners will be starting something in 20 years once we have tons of experience, once we have decades and decades of experience in neural implants. We will be like, hey, hire me. Okay. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this, and we'll talk more next time. See ya.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.